Good evening. A brief sunset rant from me to all you wonderful people out there. What can science teach us? I don't mean what sorts of things has science taught us in the past, but what sorts of things will science teach us in the future? In the past, it seems humans learned how to produce massive quantities of microplastics, trash, cement, noise, light, and machines in low Earth orbit doomed to produce space debris and then burn up in the atmosphere. All this and aerosols that are causing the global temperature to rise, among other things. Humans learned how to build ever more advanced ways of killing people, for example, not to mention forests and animals. We humans invented nuclear warheads, sarin gas, military drones, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, to name a few. Meanwhile, the sciences involved in the study of humans and the regulation of society flounder in a primitive shape. Large fields of the humanities are mired in philosophical discourse, challenged by replication crises and hampered by competing schools of thought that seem almost mutually incommensurable. Meanwhile, our species continues to destroy the biosphere, war with each other, and face socioeconomic and geopolitical inequality. How should we endeavor to develop new tech? What should we be trying to do as a culture? Invent and mass produce new tech for war, consumer devices, and large scale industrial farming? Because personally, I think we should really be focusing on old tech. Not just preserving and documenting old tech, but also expanding upon it. Or, in other words, using it to develop new and different kinds of tech. What do I mean by old tech? I mean the old technologies of cultures, language, learning, mental and physical discipline, the local environment, plants and animals, building technologies, architecture, infrastructure design, farming practices, and so forth are all included, and really any tool that people use even today that does not heavily rely on industrial mass production or electrical power. I mean the sorts of technologies that allow communities and societies to be able to live sustainably and self-reliantly for many generations. These even include the tech used in things like art, music, literature, performance, and magical practice. Understanding functional things from our past is as useful as understanding dysfunctional ones, and can be used as inspiration for new, sustainable tech. But I also think this doesn't just include studying human culture, but also studying wildlife and the ways that their ecologies work and don't work. The ways in which wildlife does things translates to human models and can be used to develop a biomimetic tech. But studying wildlife ecology is also foundational to having a sustainable human future, to be able to ensure that our own home ecosystems, the places where we live, don't all die. Now, I don't think it's practical to move to radically abandon technologies like the internet that we currently rely on as a society, and which are in many ways very useful, especially not at what especially not at all at once. What I'm suggesting instead is that the main goals of science and technology need to be fundamentally reoriented if we are to survive as a species. If our culture builds swords, we will go to war. If it builds plowshares, we'll farm. Our culture builds smartphones, so we use smartphones all the time. But if our culture makes things that are sacred and that last, then we could basically become a society of powerful witches and wizards. Potentially. What will you build? What will others build? What will we build? Time is a corridor. Sunsets may only follow each other, one at a time. And that's my 2 sunset cents. Microspherals, that's a fun word to say. Microspherules in a matrix of magnesium orthosilicate. Why are egg-shaped craft shaped like eggs? Hash browns, anyone? Plus, birds flying into windows may seem like an overused horror trope, but the problem is actually much worse in real life. All this and more tonight. I'm Rachel Nelson.
I'm Jeff Knox.
I'm Luis Cayetano.
Welcome, boys. And
well, it's a little cooler this weekend than it's been the last couple of shows, so that's nice.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So we are comfortable. And now, this is Ufo Sunset. Okay, hold on a second. Sorry about that. Welcome. And now for the rebrief. Mylar balloons resulted in water boil advisories in New Orleans. At around 7 p.m. on Tuesday, a Mylar balloon struck a power line near the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans, resulting in a temporary power fluctuation, according to officials from Entergy New Orleans. Multiple balloons were also likely involved. This fluctuation, This fluctuation caused water pumps to temporarily go offline. One worker was injured while responding to the pumps. The Sewage and Water Board instituted a precautionary water boil advisory, which was lifted after water samples were taken from all areas affected and tested for harmful bacteria. Most birds that hit buildings die even after rescue, says a new study. It's unknown how many birds die each year because of collisions with buildings, but the number is probably very high. A study published in 2014 estimated that between 400 million and 1 billion die because of building collisions each year in the US alone. A new study published on Tuesday in the journal PLOS One may shed some light on how fatal building collisions are to birds. The study was authored by R. Kornreich, Dustin Partridge, Mason Youngblood, and Caitlin Perkins. The study examines 3,100 cases of birds that were rescued for rehabilitation, including 152 different bird species. They found that less than 40% of birds survived rehabilitation. The remaining 60% either were unable to survive or were euthanized when rehabilitators determined they would not be able to recover. And tonight is the best time to watch the Perseids. August 11th through 12th is the peak of activity for the Perseid meteor shower, which is visible throughout the northern hemisphere and the northern part of the southern hemisphere. They're best viewed from the middle northern latitudes. The best time to view them is after midnight, though they will be visible for much of the night starting at around 10 p.m. The Perseids get their name because their path through the night sky originates at a point near the constellation Perseus in the northern sky. They are visible from July 17th to August 24th, but tonight is the best time for viewing them. For people in northern latitudes, tonight is also a good night for aurora viewing, as 3 coronal mass ejections from the sun will collide with Earth in the next 2 days. According to spaceweather.com, the resulting geomagnetic storms will be mild to moderate. Well,
I might have to go outside and see if I can see some of these suckers tonight.
Yeah.
My mom actually texted me, reminded me last night that it was the Perseid meteor shower. So
yeah, that's what I plan on doing after the show.
Yeah, when the sun's still up, it's when you can see them best, you know.
No, I'm probably gonna leave at like 9 or something. Maybe leave at 8:30. I was thinking about walking up to Rocky Butte.
Yeah, I'll probably just go outside the house and see if I can see anything. But I don't know. I always have really bad luck, like it's cloudy and stuff like that, and you just can't really see anything. And it's actually been pretty cloudy today, so
Yeah, it
we
has
will
cleared
see.
up though. Yeah,
Yeah, a little bit.
yeah.
Yep.
Hopefully it'll be clear.
So is Louise.
Do you think I've got any chance of seeing it in Central Valley?
Is it pretty? Is there a lot of light pollution there?
Yeah, and it's a bit cloudy. It's not too bad, but I'll see if I can see anything.
Yeah, it's best to go somewhere where you can really see the sky.
Yeah.
So if the horizon is really like hazy and there's a lot of light pollution, then I think your chances might not be very good. But
Yeah. Well.
So, Luis, you read the UFO Handbook by Alan Hendry, is that correct?
I am reading it. It's this one. So this is a really excellent book that everyone should check out. It's not in print anymore, I don't think. It was printed in 1979. It's by Alan Hendry. He was the chief investigator for Ufos, Center for UFO Studies. I think that's a defunct organization, right, Jeff? Oh, you got it too. It's also available in hardback, by the way, anyone who's watching.
It's available in hardback?
It is, yeah. I've seen it on eBay.
Wow,
yeah.
I've never actually seen that before. Yeah.
And by the way, Rachel, if you could maybe put the link later on for the documentary called
The Case of UFOs.
Of the UFOs, yeah, from PBS Nova 1982. That's actually got clips with Alan Hendry talking about some cases, including Venus being cleared to land at an airport, and cases like that. Also, another really cool sort of genre within identified flying objects is the advertising planes at night. So they were a pretty common cause for nocturnal lights, one of the categories of IFOs that Hendry looked at. He provides like statistics for each category. So he goes into like the IFOs, the nighttime ones, the daylight ones, and also IFO cases that explain close encounters of the first, second, and third kind. And then he goes into the UFOs. He provides a lot of sort of statistics and maps and things, ways to check these out for yourself, like calling the observer at an airport and things like that, advertising companies for possible activity in the area, star maps and things of that sort. And yeah, it's a good book. It's also got a very excellent chapter about statistics. And I actually put up that chapter on my website, ufologyiscorrupt.com. Have you read the book, Jeff?
A long time ago.
Yeah. Has this book ever been bested as like a guide to how to investigate UFOs? Because it seems to me like this is the gold standard, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably the gold standard. Like the only other, like as far as like main published books, like there's that Haynes manual that Nigel Watson wrote on investigating UFOs, which isn't bad. It's a bit smaller, less complete and thorough as Alan Hendry's book is. Besides for that, it's mostly just the things that various UFO organizations have put out, like Bufora in the UK, I think, put out a guide on UFO investigations that they did. And of course, like the MUFON field guide on doing investigations. But as far as like books that have actually been published, yeah, I'd say it's probably the best. Yeah.
Yep. And I'm really impressed by, back then they didn't have the internet, but they had the yellow pages. They had obviously telephones. They had libraries, and people, even in this day where we do have the internet, people are still unbelievably lazy, or they got no clue how to look for information. I find that really astonishing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the whole problem with the whole do your own research idea. Everyone's like, do your own research. Most people have no clue how to do research. Like how to research to these people means watching a YouTube video and parroting back everything they heard. Like they don't actually know how to do real research.
Mm-hmm. And also the book kind of destroys the idea that we always hear, the witnesses know what they saw. They demonstrably very, very, very often don't know what they saw, and their reports diverge wildly from the actual proven cause of that sighting. And we see this with, I was really amazed by how many cases there were with stars, because, you know, we think of stars as like little points of light in the sky, but, you know, people have made all kinds of, or imputed all kinds of meanings into stars, including things like coming towards them or away from them, based on the dimming of the light or the change in the color. Even discerning, you know, humanoids within that so-called flying saucer, or all kinds of things like that. So it's really amazing. So it's like a good book to sort of remind yourself that human testimony is actually very fraught with these sorts of problems.
Yeah. There was a quote I was trying to find that I had looked up from Hendry after that 1980s Smithsonian UFO symposium that they had, that had Oberg, Klass, Hendry, Hynek, and everybody at it. And I can't find the exact quote, but he was basically just saying how he's like agnostic, and like that's how you kind of like, you should be agnostic to what the end results of stuff are. Like you shouldn't be afraid that things have like IFO explanations, that there's just a star or Venus, or that there's sociological explanation for something or a psychological explanation for something, because he's interested in the truth, not trying to fit things into a specific theory, you know, as to what things might be. He's just trying to come to this, you know, the proper answer, the proper solution.
And he got a little bit of flack from both sides, right?
Yeah. I mean, he was, I think a lot of UFO people considered him quite skeptical, pretty much a skeptic in many cases, but not quite as far as like Klass and other people. But I thought he was fair. You mentioned advertising planes. I actually did a case back on April 29th. That was in 1978 in Aurora, Illinois. That was based on an article he wrote for the International UFO Reporter called "The Case of the IFO Study: Advertising Planes," and it's where it was a helicopter with these lights, you know, and like I say, he called around, talked to airports, and figured out that, you know, this UFO that people took a photo of was actually just like this helicopter advertising plane with lights on it. And a lot of the stuff that's in this book actually contains like images and stuff that was also used in like the International UFO Reporter. So I think there's probably a bit of same kind of content in this article as maybe was already covered in the book. But yeah, I thought, I mean, he was a fair investigator and wasn't afraid to call things explained when he figured them out, you know, and not everybody likes that. Some people like the mystery to be maintained. And so if you figure out something, you're just a skeptical debunker. But no, I don't think he was reflexively debunking anything. Like he was just trying to take as unbiased scientific look at the cases as he could. And yeah.
Do you know if he's still alive? He would be 74 now, according to his age, when he was born, sorry.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone's ever kept in touch with him. Or did he just drop out completely from the scene?
Yeah, I actually wondered that a little while ago, and I never found an answer. Like you mentioned, his age, he could still easily be alive, but I have not heard anything anywhere in the literature about him for decades. So I don't know where he is. I don't know if he keeps in touch with any of the Ufos people. Like Ufos people are still around. It's just not really. It's more like a background organization. Like they're not doing any active kind of stuff. Like they're mostly like trying to preserve and scan the records and archive it, and you know they've been putting their material on their website and stuff like that. But they don't really do any active investigations, or like they're not like an active functioning body anymore. Kind of like NICAP, right? Like NICAP still has a website, that you can check out and look at the material, but they're not, like taking cases. They don't actually have a functional body that's operating them in any way. So, but there's still a board of directors and all that stuff.
Oh, and Rachel, there was a couple of cases in there that reminded me of something that you had talked about previously, which was, I think, about the sea foam.
Oh.
But it wasn't sea foam. He was talking about spider webs. So
yeah,
like, obviously not the same thing, but sort of it makes it plausible that maybe sea foam could be mistaken for UFOs on occasion. But there were actually a couple of cases where spider web silk from these bubble spiders, the ones that sort of they're sent aloft by the wind because they put out a reel of silk. And a couple of cases where I think it was in October when these spiders are most active. They were mistaken for UFOs by 2 witnesses.
The silk was so they saw it in the air and they thought it was a UFO. They thought the silk was a UFO. That's really interesting.
Like I saw a paper where they saw like those spider webs that travel in the air, like they basically propel themselves using electrostatic forces and stuff, and like they can travel large distances, like extremely long distances.
I
pretty wild
about that too. Or actually, I think what I did was I made a video that was a response to one of your posts, Jeff. What was it today in UFO history post? It had to do with some like angel hair case or something like that.
Yeah.
But you said that there was before the show, Luis. You said that he also talked about a case, or maybe more than one case, where witnesses reported birds as UFOs, but they also described them like birds.
Yeah, I think it was a couple of girls. They saw a flock of birds. I think maybe geese or swans. They called this report into Henry. It was like he was getting tons of reports from around the country. They themselves described it as like a bird-like, swarm. What do you call it? Flock. And that they were making bird-like sounds, and yet they thought it was a UFO sighting.
It's fascinating.
And of course, there's the whole insects. The swarms of insects that people have mistaken as UFO sightings. In fact, there's whole papers looking at the Uinta Basin, where Skinwalker Ranch is, looking at that big flap or kind of wave they had back in the day as being related to insects, and insects that kind of like their cycle, where they all end up coming out like a certain time of year, and then they flock in these big swarms, and they can end up looking like UFOs. And there's been actually several papers. I did a whole thread a couple years ago on insects as UFOs and the different theories kind of like behind that. And
are there many cases where like the bioluminescent insects are mistaken for UFOs at night, especially?
I don't know about many, but I definitely believe that's the case. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised in looking at the Betty and Barney Hill case, where they talk about some of her later videos that she filmed, that they said you could barely see these dots, in the film. You had to like put your face up to the projection screen to see these light sources that she was filming, with her camera. And they in that paper spec, like maybe it was like just star trails that she was getting with the camera, but I think I've read elsewhere people speculated they were things like like lightning bugs or the fireflies or whatever that were actually just like being filmed out there, and they weren't UFOs at all. I mean, there's definitely a lot of people filming bugs believing that they're UFOs and they're not. So,
and of course, drones would now be added to Henry's list of IFOs.
Yeah.
Drones weren't such a thing back then. I mean, military drones were actually used during Vietnam, but they weren't as advanced as the ones now, and they weren't a thing in commercial applications. But now they're everywhere. You can buy them at Walmart, and you can even make them look like UFOs. Some drones are actually designed to look like flying saucers.
Yeah, they sell them that way, like to mimic saucers. Yeah.
Yeah, but he does talk about a few hoaxes, balloon hoaxes by teenagers and people like that. including one police report or police case where the cops actually investigated and arrested the person who was causing this fake UFO sighting. That was kind of amusing.
Yeah. Yeah, like I mentioned before, I think it's important to learn about all these IFO cases because that way when we're analyzing a new case, you know, we can compare and notice things that like, well, wait a second, this actually seems a lot like something that was just an IFO. Maybe it is, you know. And we can learn more from those than we can from an unknown because we really don't learn anything from an unknown because it's an unknown. We don't know anything about it. So it's the identifieds that we learn from and we hone our skills, and people shouldn't be afraid of identifying things. Like all that means is that we're getting rid of, you know, all the chaff looking for the wheat. So, and maybe we find something interesting eventually, but we should be getting rid of that low-hanging fruit that we can't identify or that at least has plausible explanations. And that's the thing with like a lot of people, like they get mad at skeptics or people when they explain things and they're like, well, you didn't prove it 100%. It's like, well, yeah, I think most skeptics aren't claiming that's 100% guaranteed to be the answer. Like when Mick West analyzed UFO videos, he's not saying 100% for sure it's, you know, a distant fighter jet at 10. He's just saying that's based on like the evidence we have, that's most likely to be what it's looking at. Like if new evidence presented itself, then we can go back and, you know, reassess. But people that explain cases, like they're really doing it with like 100% certainty. It's just more of a likelihood, like it's more probable that that's an explanation. And in my view, if you have a probable explanation for a case, even if you can't prove it, like if that was likely a drone flying around, even if I can't find who flew the drone or, you know, definitively say that person was flying a drone, like in my case, the case is essentially solved. In my view, it's essentially solved. Like there's no point looking at it further. Like maybe it was a UFO that just happens to act just like a drone. Who knows? But it was probably just a drone. So.
But do you, on that topic, do you think that there's a criticism by some people that like Blue Book and people like Phil Klass, they kind of try to always find an explanation, and instead of just saying sometimes we don't know what it is. Do you think that critique is fair?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent anyways. Yeah, a lot of people felt that because of that, they're just kind of like trying to shoehorn things in. And to be clear, I don't agree with all of Klass's explanations or Menzel's or any other skeptics. I think their explanations sometimes are just ridiculous. That doesn't mean I think the alien explanation is valid, but I think some of their explanations are just as absurd. And I think some of those people did have a tendency to try to want to fit everything into, like, you know, Klass had his pet theories about like plasma, you know, balls and all that kind of stuff. And so even skeptics sometimes tend to have their pet theories that they try to shoehorn everything into. But I mean, at least he was trying to find a possible explanation for something. A lot of people are just too willing to leave things in that mystery box, that unknown box, and aren't even looking for potential explanations. I just think you need to be clear that sometimes you're not certain. You just think it's likely that's the solution. So like, I can't prove, like, we'll never be able to prove what happened in 2004 with the Nimitz case, like what actually caused that sighting. Like, but that being said, you know, I don't think it was like an alien craft of some kind flying around.
I feel like there's a certain level of, like, it's basically, you know, if you're able to come up with an explanation that's reasonable, that's really all you need to do. Because, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it was, but it means that, like, there's at least one far more likely explanation, you know, than it being aliens or something like that. Just by Occam's razor alone, I think that's fine, you know, personally.
And it doesn't preclude coming back to that case if new evidence comes to light, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on the other hand, when people start to elaborate their stories, then that's different. I mean, I'm talking about tangible evidence that comes to light. When people start to build on the previous story and add elements to it, then that's problematic.
Yeah,
that's the same thing.
Yeah, but if like someone finds like a set of photos or something, I don't know.
Well, one of the things people like Mick West and other skeptics get like criticized for is how they're ignoring evidence, but really because they're not like taking what witnesses said as like fact in their analysis, like, but that's not really ignoring evidence. We're talking about like actual verifiable evidence, like physical evidence, like, you know, sensor tapes, videotapes, whatever, like actual evidence, like as a person, like I don't criticize, for example, Mick West with not taking what later people added onto the story as like oral testimony as being accurate for his simulations, because then you're just going on somebody's story. You're not going on the evidence you have. Someone like Mick West can only go on the evidence we have, and all that is that video. All we can go is what's on the video, and that's what he's doing. And I don't think you can fault them for that, because as we know, eyewitness testimony just is not reliable. Like it's just not accurate. Like as far as analyzing evidence, the only real evidence in most of these cases are like those short videos. And I don't.
Witness testimony is still interesting for what it tells us about how human perception works and all that.
And it can guide us in our investigation as to where to potentially look for other evidence or corroborating evidence. Like you absolutely should take it into consideration. But for example, like when you're doing like a physics simulation in SITREC, like the witness testimony isn't really relevant. Like just analyzing the video is. So
I do think, however, there are ways to use witness testimony. It's just that you have to kind of like Hufford used experience reports to basically determine the existence of the sleep paralysis experience, like, and to show that it's not culturally bound and that it's, you know, universal. And from there, he was able to figure out that it had to do with, you know, that it was correlated somewhat with narcolepsy, and that it had to do with sleep phases and stuff like that. And or another example is, again, in medicine, you know, doctors will collect symptom reports, and then those symptom reports can be collected and analyzed as data, and you can actually there are ways of using people's reporting of things as evidence. It's just that you have to collect a large amount, and you have to like use specific methodologies to make sure that you can get good inferences from that, basically.
Yep. You guys also reminded me of something else, which was in that documentary that Jeff narrowed down, the one from 1982, the PBS Nova one. There's a segment there by a British guy. I think he's a journalist, but maybe a government person. He actually injected a fake story into the media, like a fake picture, but he deliberately left in like some elements in that photo, which if you were doing your due diligence and investigating it objectively, you would have found those anomalies in the picture and then determined that it was a fake photo. But nobody did that. Like most of the UFO investigators didn't do that. So he was like tracking how the story was spreading through the media, monitoring like all the appearances in the media, and like basically even some of the more technical treatments of that case didn't really delve deep into like the photo itself, and they could have found that it was fake, but nobody did. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I believe it. People like when they're looking at a case and investigating it, a lot of times they're really just looking to investigate and confirm that something's like anomalous and unusual. So instead of actually like doing the basics first, like analyzing the photo and maybe seeing if it's fake, they might start to go and investigate the actual, like the sighting location, talking to the supposed people in the area. Did they see anything out? Like they'll go do a full investigation when they should have done their prelims and figured out it was a bogus photo, like to begin with. It kind of reminds me of this new show they've got on with Mitch Horowitz, this alien encounter show on Discovery Channel. And they bring up a lady from Mexico City with this photo that any any like even beginner UFO investigator should have immediately recognized as the internal window reflection from the train that she was on. And I can't help but think is like, how did you guys not catch this before you flew a lady up from Mexico for your television show and filmed a whole segment with her? Or did you catch it? You just didn't care and you wanted to make a whole segment out of this nonsense like fake UFO story. I mean, it's so many people don't even do that basic investigation. You know, they don't want to actually solve the mystery. And then sometimes even when cases come out and the people say, actually, yeah, the photos are fake, then the people still don't believe that. They still believe the case was real. They lied about the photo being a fake. Somebody got to them and told them to say the photo was a fake. You see that with the famous Belgium triangle photo, the Pete Ruchin photo, whatever, that, you know, that was a total fake. But there's people like, well, no, that's actually a second photo, and that photo is a fake, that the original was the real one, and he was made to lie about it. And it's like, come on, guys. And even qualified investigators get tricked. Like there are a few photos J.L. Hynek said were some of the best UFO photos out there, like the famous Jaroslaw boys hoax photo that they hoaxed. He said that was one of the best UFO photos in the business that he's ever seen. And then the kids came out like 10 years later and said, yeah, actually we faked it. It was a pretty easy fake photo that we made, you know. So, and I think Hynek's actually been caught supporting photos that turned out to be obvious fakes that the person admitted to a few times. So, you know, even the big name UFO guys can like miss obvious photo fakes, like because they're not really looking for them.
Or document fakes in the case of Friedman and some of the MJ-12 stuff.
Yeah.
Even though he was like very diligent when it came to the Bob Lazar story and, you know, explaining the reasons why that was fake, in this other stuff, he was like promoting it. He was also promoting the Betty and Barney Hill story as a bona fide ET encounter, despite the numerous problems with that story.
Yeah. And then, of course, like, I mean, he basically wrote books with, you know, Kathleen Marden, her niece. So, like, I think some of these people, I think they get so involved with the families, like, of the cases that they also just kind of, like, almost get stuck supporting a case, like, or it influences their reasoning ability to really kind of see through, like, a made-up story. But it's kind of funny because I'll say, you know, in reading the chapters that we're going to be talking about next week, I kind of agree with this guy. Like, the more I've met so-called abductees at conferences and I've heard them talk and I've seen them in person and spoke to them face to face, the more I'm actually convinced that there's nothing true to any of their stories. I just think a lot of them are suffering mental health issues. And I'm not saying that to be mean, but just from my personal experience and all the years I've been going to conferences and talking to abductees, I agree with this other guy that I actually come away feeling less convinced of the abduction phenomenon than I am convinced of the abduction phenomenon. Because a lot of these people are clearly suffering from mental health issues for whatever reason. And yeah, so.
Would false memory be an example of a mental health issue in the sense?
Well, okay, so yeah, maybe not necessarily all mental health issues, but like, yeah, there's a lot of false memories going on as well, and people again that developed a lot of these memories using shady hypnosis regression methods by investigators, and there's a lot of reasons why people can come to have these kind of like false beliefs about being abducted. And that's another reason why I really dislike that new television show, because they're basically like telling people, they're traumatizing people live on air, like telling them, yeah, actually you may have been that what was probably just roadside hypnosis. You were actually abducted. And it's like, wow, that really validates, like, now I feel like something really horrible happened to me. It's like, come on, you shouldn't be going around telling people this like nonsense. Like, that's just not ethical. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think that having a false memory, like, I mean,
everyone has false memories.
Everyone has false memories, and they're usually pretty benign. And I don't know, maybe in some instances they might be kind of functional in a weird way or something. I don't know, but
I remember hanging out with Madonna at my house when I was like 6 years old, and we were hanging out literally in the crawl space underneath my house with a dog. Like, I remember that clear as yesterday. It didn't happen. I know it didn't happen, but I've got that memory from when I was a kid living in California, hanging out with Madonna.
That's cool.
I remember a Madonna song called Jeff. Maybe it did happen.
Maybe. Yeah. So I mean, we all have like false memories. Like it doesn't like that's why like it doesn't really necessarily make you crazy. And like a lot of just kind of like even a lot of delusions, as I said before, don't actually make you crazy. Like not well. It kind of depends. A lot of people define delusion as meaning like a belief that's harmful. So like it technically would be harmful, but I would say that not necessarily all delusions or kind of false beliefs are harmful. Like some are actually, like you say, beneficial to us. And we have reasons for believing bad information because it actually has a more advantageous, we have more of an advantage like for believing something that's false than we do for believing something that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but there are other serious health issues that can be like if a person, has schizoaffective symptoms, something like that can make that worse. Or, if a person is fantasy prone or they tend to use dissociation of one kind or another, as a coping mechanism, like, ufologists trying to coax them into believing that they were abducted, could cause serious problems for them, and especially if it's like a really, really exploitative person. I don't remember exactly who, but there were some abduction researchers who started engaging in more like culty practices and really as well as like and I think people doing hypnotic regression around like satanic panic types narratives as well, causing people to believe that they have like a dissociative personality disorder, and that they have all of these fragmented personalities inside of them and stuff like that. I think there are potentially more dangers to hypnotic regression than people even realize, because they have such an ability to manipulate a person's worldview, basically.
Well, there's a story that I was just reading in Greg's new book, I think, about Bud Hopkins, and one of the people in one of his books, I think went by like a pseudonym of Beth or something, supposedly was an abductee and was impregnated by these aliens, and then they took the baby away and it wasn't there anymore. And it turns out, it came out later on that she actually had made the whole story up to hide the fact that she was the victim of incest and had gotten an abortion to get rid of the baby. And so like Bud Hopkins continued to play this like abduction narrative up on this lady, included in her book. And the whole story was just a cover story to hide a horrible trauma that she suffered and had to get rid of the baby from. And I can't help but wonder how many cases in the UFO literature, particularly from the people of the likes like Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and the whatnot, are actually just victims of trauma that have been manipulated and basically kind of led into an alien abduction narrative by people like, unscrupulous researchers like Hopkins and Jacobs. And and that's horrible, because those people need real help. They don't need a further delusion on top of the suffering that they're already going through. They need to address the actual problem and not cover it up with a fake new memory.
It's really, and Jacobs and Hopkins, I think, are particularly exploitative. This has been really well documented that they've done some really unethical stuff.
So it's crazy.
But is there any evidence that, for example, the gray motif could act as a shield memory for something like abuse, or like the abduction motif could act as a shield memory for abuse or sexual abuse or something like that? Like, is there any actual evidence that could be true?
I'm not really aware of any I've heard people raise that hypothesis before, but I've never seen any like studies or anything that demonstrate that. I mean, like in the Varieties book, that they don't talk about anything like that, and that's a little bit it's like 10 years old. So maybe there's been more research into that, but not as far as I'm aware. I've never heard of anything demonstrating that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's people that have compared like the imagery of like the abductions with these grays, like with things like, you know, sadomasochism and various other traumas and sexual abuse, and there is a link. Like there are papers that have found links between like sexual trauma and abuse and childhood trauma and abuse and abductees. I say, like, Jeffrey Kripal wrote a paper called "The Traumatic Secret," all about how there's this link, and not just even before abductees, with people like monks going through ecstatic, like spiritual experiences, shamans, and things like that, where they were actually suffered like horrible like abuse, childhood sexual abuse and stuff, and how this traumatic secret is that actually kind of breaks open your mind, so you're open to these paranormal experiences with aliens and whatnot, and that's the theory, anyways. But he talks about like the mystic, like George Patel, and a couple of other people like in that paper. It's actually kind of the topic of that book, Prisoners of Infinity by Jason Orson. The kind of the links between trauma and this like abduction stuff, and even Whitley Strieber himself has said that had he not been abused as a child, he doesn't think he would have had these experiences with the aliens. So
well, I think that there's definitely a connection, but I don't think that it's that's very different from saying like that alien abduction memories are screen memories for trauma. I think that that's, you know, a really very different proposition, you know.
So it's more like they're just sort of transmogrified into an alien.
I mean, it absolutely happens. There's many cases of it that we know for a fact, but that people that suffered trauma that admitted that they said later on that their UFO or alien abduction experiences were just cover for trauma they actually experienced. So we know it happens all the time.
But you'd have to do a proper statistical analysis of
as far as
how many people don't go to the alien abduction motif, even though they have.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that trauma is very common. Many people experience it when they're young. And I mean, sexual trauma is common, and like simply because someone had trauma before having an alien abduction experience doesn't necessarily mean, right, that one caused the other. And also another thing too is that I think that that theory of the sadomasochism aspect of it, I think, isn't necessarily connected to trauma, and has to do with like finding fulfillment or finding like sexual fulfillment or something like that. I'm not sure, or being placed in the role of the victim too. That's another possibility. I remember there was a paper that I read about the Betty and Barney Hill case, where Betty Hill might have been trying to kind of convert this racial anxiety, you know, from her husband, you know, because they're this interracial couple.
Yeah, that's the kind of thesis of Matthew Bowen's recent book, as well as I think a paper by Christopher Bader called Race and Ufology, maybe. There's a couple papers on it, but
yeah, and I mean, there definitely is a connection between trauma and a lot of just like weird experiences, like in the Varieties of Anomalous Experience book. There are various different studies across the book, and not just in the abduction chapter, that talk specifically about trauma as well. But I think it's difficult because it could be different in different cases, different populations, you know, and it could also be, you know, like maybe some people use these experiences in some way, like maybe their mind utilizes these experiences in some way to deal with their trauma, or maybe they connect the trauma to these experiences because they add something to them or something like that, and that kind of thing. Like, I think I don't personally, I don't I haven't seen any convincing literature. I know Jeff is much more well read on this than I am, but I haven't seen anything that's convinced me that that like abduction memories are explicitly like screen memories, that the mind actually generates them to cover up a traumatic memory. And I mean, Susan Clancy would even I'm sure she would dispute that.
Not explicitly, obviously not in every case. Like
as well as
that's not the case, but in many cases,
no, I'm saying like because she would say, you know, that screen memories don't exist, you know, and that trauma is not something like. She argues that
not in the UFO
that people don't repress traumatic memories. Charles McCreary, I think, also makes this too, that basically people don't repress traumatic memories, and that this idea that like people like will forget something traumatic and then recall it many years later after their mind has processed it is really a poor description of how traumatic memories work and how they're processed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just my take, I guess. I don't know.
Well, this is why I think that it's important that that these people see real mental health professionals, not UFO associated mental health professionals, but people that have no skin in the UFO game and no interest in the UFO game, and they should be analyzing them first, you know,
not MUFON.
Them, before it even goes on to this UFO stuff. Like, that's why I have an issue with a lot of these like organizations that pop up, or like MUFON mental health counselors, or it's like, yeah, but they're all in like already with the belief system and that this is UFOs, and like, now you need somebody that's unbiased, that isn't really trying to push any one direction, that basically screens these people beforehand. And
speaking of something tangentially related to that, Martin Bacall, if you could put up his comment, please, Rachel.
Okay.
He's asking about William Shatner, who famously went into space fairly recently. I think on one of the, Jeff Bezos, isn't he the one who went up with
Origin or whatever? Yeah, I think, he went up with Bezos, didn't he?
Yeah. And he actually, in this other book, I'll show you, that I'm also reading, not nearly as good as this one, but this one by Diana Walsh-Pasulka, Encounters. She relates stories about like astronauts going into space and having like this sort of profound shift in perspective about the universe. So some of them feel like there has to be life out there when they go out into space and see the Earth for the first time.
The overview effect.
Sorry?
Isn't that what they call it? Like the overview effect?
The overview effect, yeah. And Shatner had something similar, and he started to cry, and he wasn't expecting that. And it wasn't because he was happy, it was because he was sad. He saw space as being dead and the Earth as being alive, and that we're surrounded by death, basically. And so, you know, but he felt like there has to be life out there in the universe. We can't be the only thing in this ocean of death.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was a kind of interesting
lot.
Little side note there. But I mean, I would like to interview William Shatner. I think he goes too far in his beliefs. Obviously, like he leans heavily into the UFO stuff. He was actually he actually did a lot of kind of UFO documentaries back in the 70s and 80s. You can find them on YouTube.
Recently,
like the narrator,
just recently he did that Tear in the Sky one, you know, with the X folks, and he can be kind of weird about UFOs though. Like, I've seen him like call bullshit on UFO stuff before too, but in some of the documentaries, you know, when he's paid to be there, he seems to be a little bit more like open to promoting some of the kind of bunk that they're selling. But yeah, he's promoted. He I believe, didn't he do one of the Chariots of the Gods like documentaries?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. So
yeah. But I would like to talk to him.
That would be fun to talk
if
to.
he ever wants to talk to people that are actually knowledgeable about the UFO topic instead of the usual people that he talks to, he can come here. Yeah.
So,
And
Jeff,
have you read? Sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
well, actually, no, you go ahead first, Louise. I was going to invite Jeff to do his section on microspherules. So if you had another question you wanted to ask before.
I was just gonna, and we could probably postpone this to another episode, but I was gonna ask you both if you had read Encounters.
No, I own American Cosmic, but I have not actually read it yet. So, but Encounters is the newer one, so I haven't even gotten to that one yet.
I have not read that one yet. I have, like I said, I had the first one in hardback and audiobook. I've got Encounters in audiobook. I don't have the hardback. I just have not had a chance to listen to the audiobook of it yet. Because to be honest, Poselka is not really one of the people that I have a great interest in hearing from about this topic. But but I'll get around to it eventually anyway.
Yeah, I definitely do want to read both of Poselka's books because I'm sure that she has something, important to say. But she
does to an extent, yeah, to an extent, but she goes way too far. But anyway, we can talk about that in some future episode.
Yeah, I think it would be great to cover both of those books at some point in great detail.
Yeah, my issue with her, like I said before, is mostly that she kind of lost all kind of objectivity. Like, so she basically, instead of doing, she became a participant observer, but then kind of just went even too far and like joined the cult, and in my view, and is kind of all in with a lot of these kind of less than credible people. But which is
kind of too bad.
Unfortunate, because I felt
she seems really cool. Like, she's really smart.
Yeah,
she is.
Like I said, I think a lot of these people get captured in the personality cult of some of these figures, and like they get stuck in it.
All right, so you want to tell us about this magnesium orthosilicate matrix?
Well, I mean, just a few slides that I was just gonna briefly, just real quick, talk about these like iron microspherules. And so, if you recall, in the kind of the Moore Smith presentation, we heard that these samples contained various like magnesium orthosilicates, but they also had these thousands of like these 15 micron spheres scattered throughout it. In other places, they mentioned talking about. They mentioned some of the spheres up to 1/8 of an inch. I don't know how many of those would have been. It seems like most of them were much, much smaller. They said 1/8 of an inch to pinpoint in size. It seems like most of them are very, very small. 15 microns is very, 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 very tiny. And people may be wondering, and if you recall also in the sample that he had gotten from that 3,000 pound piece that Wilbert Smith had gotten from the St. Lawrence River, this little kind of piece here, they also thought that it came from space because it contained thousands and thousands of these little kind of microspherules, these magnetic iron microspherules. Well, these like magnetic iron microspherules are actually quite common, and you can find them all over the place. Two books that I have are these books by this guy named John Larson on the Trail of Stardust and In the Search of Stardust. And I actually got both those books, and they're about basically finding and identifying micrometeorites and terrestrial imposters. And so like he would go around and collect from like things like rooftops, runoff drainages off roads, things like that, samples of like the dirt and dust, and go through them with like a microscope and look for these little microspherules to see if they'd be micrometeorites. Only the problem is a lot of the time, while some of them are in fact micrometeorites, a lot of them have anthropogenic sources. They're from industrial processes. And basically, any time that we get molten kind of like metal that gets kind of kicked up like in the air, whether like you're burning something or whether you're even just flicking a lighter, that metal to metal contact or breaks onto the road, anytime kind of like this molten like chunks of metal end up in the air, they kind of consolidate into little spheres. Does that make sense? Because spheres are basically, like a simple, like structurally sound kind of like structures. And so when these pieces of these metals end up in molten form in the air, they rapidly solidify into all these little microspheres. And we get them kind of all over the place. These right, where'd that slide go? So like these right here, for example, are ones that he collected, and he's from Norway, and he collected these, and he says you get just these constantly on roads, rooftops, everywhere, because they're anthropogenic little microspheres that created. And you'll get them again with like power when you use power tools or grinding or welding rooms. Anything that creates heat on metal contact releases little tiny molten sparks and turns into like these little microspheres here. And these are entirely anthropogenic ones that he had found. These are also anthropogenic microspheres. And if you recall in the presentation, they mentioned that some of these little microspheres they found in the sample had a kind of an indentation on them on kind of at one point. And you do see that with these microspheres. In fact, and you can kind of see these indents. And that's actually because they compact as they rapidly solidify. They kind of compact into each other, and you end up getting a dent. And in the Moore segment, they speculated again that it was caused by like gases on the solidification process, and that's actually essentially what is happening here. Now these ones right here were from sparks. No, those were just random ones. Oh, no, these ones are from a welding shop. So a welding shop, will create these from all the different kind of like sparks. Now, you may recall A.V. Loeb recently collected a bunch of microspherules from the floor of the ocean that he had thought was perhaps extraterrestrial in nature. And these are like some of the photos that he provided of the kind of microspherules he found. And when he looked at them, he found various elements in them like uranium. They found lanthanum and beryllium in them. And so he thought because these are rare that they meant they were from outer space, when actually those are indicators that they're from industrial anthropogenic sources, such as like coal factories and whatnot in China. In fact, if you look at the sparks created by lighters, if you like just light a regular lighter, those sparks will contain lanthanum, cerium, in addition to like a magnetic iron. So these are actually real micrometeorites. This is an image of actual micrometeorites that came from space that had landed on Earth. You can see they're quite a bit different looking than the things A.V. Loeb in fact found over here, which look a lot more like the anthropogenic ones that like we've seen photos of. You can see sometimes these little edges or things that stick off is because depending on the process in which they're created, you get different effects on solidification. Sometimes you get splash effects. Sometimes there'll be drips, kind of like if you've ever heard of like I believe that really strong glass, what do they call it, Prince Albert glass or whatever, or that is so strong they can put it in a vice press like and it doesn't crack. You get drips as well with these little microspherules sometimes, where it almost looks like a barbell of two microspherules. So kind of just depending on how they're created, like from a welding shop, you get different ones in factories that create things like steel wool. But pretty much any time you get molten metal, you end up with these microspherules everywhere, and they land and you can find them. And so I think these microspherules that were found in this sample, this here right here is sometimes they're even larger. This is one with, again, this indentation. And this is a massive iron spherule that they found that's from anthropogenic sources. So just because you find microspherules in something does not mean they're meteorites. You have to kind of classify them and look at them a bit more in process that would have produced anything too exciting about that. I think and these are all magnetic type anthropogenic spheres that he has photos of in these books, and they're in various sizes. Most of them, in fact, one of the things they concluded in looking at sparks, one of the problems they first had with sparks and the samples that they produced is that they were nearly identical to actual extraterrestrial meteorites. And so people had thought for a while, how are we supposed to distinguish between extraterrestrial micrometeorites and the things that are being produced by lighters, sparks from like lighters and whatnot? Well, one of the criteria they came up with is basically anything that's under 50 microns in size is probably not a micrometeorite. In fact, these microspheroids that are created by like lighter sparks tend to be only like 1% of the size of like an average micrometeorite. So they're even smaller. But as we found out, apparently from that, Wilbert Smith says these samples, these little microspherules were about 15 microns, far smaller than the 50 micron cutoff for micrometeorites. So it's pretty certain that the microspherules that Wilbert Smith found, both in just the Alvin Moore sample and this later St. Lawrence River sample, are just magnetic iron spherules created from the steel production process that end up. Because if you recall, that's how they get the slag, is they take the molten slag gets poured into a sand pit, and it cools off into these various chunks that they then later use for construction processes and whatnot. So yeah, that's that's just wanted to briefly talk about the microspherules and how they're probably anthropogenic, almost certainly. And if you're interested in looking for your own micrometeorites, I do recommend those books by John Larson, because they're pretty cool books. And some of these different sources are interesting. Some of them, they're not all metal. Sometimes you get these microspherules, like glass microspherules as well. Black asphalt road actually creates these kind of like funky looking magnetic microspherules. So there's all sorts of processes that create these like microspherules. And most of them are anthropogenic. But of course, to someone like Wilbert Smith, finding microspherules to him was all the proof he needed it came from space, and it supported his theory that it was from a craft. So no need to look any further.
These microspherules they're probably too small to, I don't know. I'm just thinking of like, earlier in this series on this channel, I did a piece on a Scientific American article to do with space manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And I talked about like how in space you can get much more homogeneous mixtures of solutes in a solution, because of zero microgravity. And that could be a way of actually telling whether something was manufactured by aliens. Like if we found like a spaceship, for example, or something the size of a spaceship, and the metal in it contained like very homogeneous mixtures of solutes, and that would suggest like an industrial base, like an industrial manufacturing capability around the planet or something like that, which we don't currently have that level of capability. That would be strong evidence for ET. But like with these little microspherules, can you actually tell the homogeneity of something, of the solutes?
Well, they look at them with like electron scanning microscopes and whatnot to kind of like come up with what's inside of them, and to kind of take 3D images of them and stuff. And as far as being in space, they've actually found these in like lunar regolith as well. They found all these little microspherules in samples of lunar regolith that they brought back. And some of them are actually formed kind of before they actually even get to Earth. So you can get some of them from the impact event. And impacts are also known to create things like microtectites and things like that, and shock quartz and things like that. But you can get them from the impact event for when the meteorite or whatever hits the ground. But you can also get these ones that seem to be even more spherical and perfect that come off when it's still way up there. that get ablated off of it, in space. So they're actually created. So the spherules are created extraterrestrially. They're just, created in the process of when the thing comes down here, and then they fall to Earth and land here. And from looking at the images, I do believe they tend to be like more perfect spheres and like nicer looking images that look almost more homogenized. But even road dust crystals, like I don't know if you can see this, like you get kind of weird crystal kind of like shapes, from road dust when you look at it under microscopes. So,
sorry.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah, that's microspherules are also one of the forms of evidence used to support this impact hypothesis about the lower Dryas boundary, or the younger Dryas.
The
younger Dryas boundary. Excuse me.
In fact, when I was looking for pictures to just kind of throw up on the slides before I just got the book, most of the papers I was coming up with were pictures from younger Dryas theory, impact theory hypotheses.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to study that more. There was something else I wanted to say about that, but I forgot what it was. Oh yeah, so if something explodes, like say you get a bolide that explodes in the atmosphere.
Yep.
Then would that produce microspherules in the atmosphere the same way that a lighter would, basically, like the same kind of principle?
Yeah, that's what those are, those like abloided ones that they talk about in here somewhere, that like they're formed in space, like when they come down, but they're actually formed up there as the pieces of debris come
high, very high in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and then they fall down. So you get them falling from up there. You get them from the impact event down here when they impact with debris and it kicks up. Like, I mean, any time you end up with not even just molten metal, but really molten or like anything, and there's not other forces kind of acting on it, things want to form in like a circle, like, or a drop like shape, so I've thought about collecting them, but like I said, it's a lot of work. You collect dust, then you've got to have like a microscope, and you're going through it with like piece by piece, like looking at them to try and find them. And like he talks about, like we get an average of 75. He talked about this road he was collecting stuff from in Norway, that they kept finding these like spherules and they didn't know what they were. And it's like we get about 75 of them for every 2.5 kilograms of road dirt I collect. And he did this like repeatedly over years to like, compare the ratios of these microspherules in the dirt to total weight of dirt. And he eventually, I guess, figured out that they were from a road tunnel. They were building up the road, and the trucks that would drive like all this dirt and dust would collect on their wheels, and they'd wash it off, and it would the runoff would end up in these roadway drainage like channels that he was collecting them from, like further down, the highway. And that's where these were basically coming from, was this construction. But in many cases, they still don't know 100% how they're being formed, or like specifically what processes are creating them. Like they'll know the elemental compositions, what elements of them, but they don't know what exact process. Like they can't say what power tool or which industrial process was creating it. They just know that's likely what it was. And in most cases, they seem to do it based on like physical characterization. They look at those other traits of like those spherules. Like, for example, like if things come from a welding shop, they tend to have more of these like splash and splatter kind of like spots that come off of them that you can kind of tell that it's not natural. So,
and so were these touted as like close encounters of the second kind? Is that what? Yeah, C2's right, where you leave traces behind.
Yeah, traces. Yeah.
Yeah. So like they were tied to a sighting of a UFO.
It's
not even that.
But yeah, I mean that's like in these cases, not really. Like the St. Lawrence sample in the 60s, allegedly people heard like a sonic boom in Ontario, and then this was found a few days later, and people just assumed the connected.
Yeah.
Again, with the Moore sample, like it was just assumed because there was UFO sightings in the region at the time that it was somehow connected. But if you really look at it, there was no actual UFO sighting connected to either of these two events that they found these pieces of slag. And really, there rarely is. Like when they find these pieces of slag, usually it's somebody finds a piece of slag and then later assumes it comes from like a UFO. You know, although with the Maury Island case, they kind of added that in from the beginning. You know, the slag fell from the UFO and it landed on my boat and killed my dog that didn't actually ever exist. That never was a dog. There's no UFO sighting in these cases, unfortunately. Just the assumption that there was a UFO, and so they end up in the UFO literature.
Yeah, and that's something that Hendry talks about in his book as well. Is in his CE2 cases, he just discounted anything where there wasn't like a link with a specific sighting, because like there's too many ways that different processes could form these these effects on the ground, and so he just sort of threw those out unless there was an actual sighting connected to it.
And that's basically what like the Condon Project said when looking at Moore and his case, is that if you recall, Lowe basically said, unless there's any convincing reason to believe these have anything to do with the UFO sighting, you know, unless you can prove evidence that like it's connected, there's really no point in us even looking or spending any more time on this, because there's no UFO sighting. So what are we supposed to do with it? And because I agree. I think any found samples like that are not like immediately connected to an alleged UFO event, like you can probably dismiss as them finding something that just has a terrestrial origin to it. And that's the truth with almost all UFO samples, though. If you think about it, the Ubatuba, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, the Brazilian magnesium sample, you know, there's allegedly a story of something crashing into the ocean, and that's potentially how that sample is related. But again, there's no real UFO sighting tied to that either. The famous, like the Council Bluff, Iowa piece that Jack Valet talks about a lot, again, no UFO sighting connected to that either. Like almost all of these UFO debris cases, there's no actual UFO event that was ever tied to them. People just assume it must be from a UFO.
And that includes as well the similar. Well, they're not. It's got nothing to do with the spherules that you've described, but the rings on the ground, right? Which are actually caused by fungi often.
The fairy rings. Yeah, I think that's a lot of the cases of these, again, these ground marks is the exact same situation. And in some cases, there absolutely were UFOs associated with it. Like one of the comments on our last video was somebody wanted me to do the I guess it's Langenberg. I thought it was like Langenberg, but Langenberg, Canada sighting, where he did see UFOs that left these landmarks. But in many cases, people just find the marks in the field, crop circles. People assume they're connected to UFOs, like, you know, when there's no real reason to believe that they're connected to UFOs. I mean, there was like that one fake video of an orb flying around creating a crop circle that was created by that CGI guy. But for the most part, it's just people finding circles or marks in the ground of some nature and assuming they have something to do with the UFO case. But I agree. I think we can kind of like dismiss them as UFO cases because they don't really have anything to do with UFO. Like, I don't think this last case I did really is particularly a UFO case. I just addressed it because it became a UFO case in the literature. But if I was to look at it, I don't think it was a UFO case because it didn't have anything to do with the UFO. Nobody saw a UFO. So. Yep.
Well, I mean, I think that this trash on my bedroom floor had to have come from somewhere. So
it's the Skymen. That's what Alvin Moore would say, that trash was from the Skymen. It's just
sky trash.
And it may be trash to you, but you're not using the 4-dimensional alien science. In the alien dimension, what looks like trash to us could be an advanced propulsion system, according to Alvin Moore, anyways. And Wilbert Smith and his group of crazies also kind of believe that theory. So just because something's garbage in our dimension doesn't mean its properties aren't magical in the infinite 8th dimension of Buckaroo Banzai.
You heard it here first, unless you heard it in a higher dimension of time.
Yes.
Okay. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk about.
That's a great book.
But which one was it again?
Watch the Skies.
Symbols.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So many books that I need to read.
So many books.
I wanted to comment on a couple of things I noticed in the last episode. The Gods Must Be Crazy is not a movie that I like. But it's also surrounded by a huge amount of controversy over the years. It was actually protested at the time that it came out. Another, I don't remember the name of the author, but she wrote an article about how it really misrepresents the San people and the people of South Africa, and is often regarded as a racist movie. So I just wanted to comment on that I don't think it's a good idea to make a remake of that movie. But that's not an indictment of you, Jeff. I just feel like, this is we are all white here, and but I don't want this show to be coming off as, white people being ignorant and insensitive. Also, rap is a wonderful art form that I love, as well as hip hop culture in general. And as a side note, ballroom culture. That is worthy. All of these things are worthy.
Rap. Yeah. What did I say about rap? That all the rappers would be in prison because they've boasted about killing people.
Yeah, but in reality, though, most rappers are not killers.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course not.
I should have been clearer. That I was alluding to the more obnoxious artists who are constantly making references in the music about killing and whoremongering and all that.
Yeah, I mean, the worst is probably the misogyny, to be honest. I think, if it's violence or misogyny, I think, I don't mind NWA rapping about shooting cops, honestly. But, when it's rapping about, bitches and hoes and stuff like that, it really makes me uncomfortable. But, yes, I do very much enjoy rap, and I think hip hop is a really valuable part of American and global culture. But that is not, again, I'm not trying to attack Jeff or Luis. I just felt compelled to make that observation. We're not trying to exclude anybody at this show. And UFOs should be for everybody.
Yep.
And
so should skepticism and looking at the evidence.
Oh yeah, well, I think critical thinking and rational thinking, I think, should also be for everyone. Must emphasize, anti-intellectualism is bad, and if you're making enemies with people because they're saying rational things, I think you're doing a disservice to your country.
Yeah.
We need to end the American tradition of anti-intellectualism.
It's a long, proud American tradition.
It really is.
I mean, yeah, I would say that, just because you take a more skeptical approach or kind of use critical thinking and a more rational approach, doesn't mean you necessarily think there's nothing to this topic. You don't think it's worthy of study. There's some of the people that I know that, have put more time and effort into studying this topic than anyone, approach it quite skeptically and rationally. And if they were Twitter people, they would be called debunkers probably. But it doesn't mean that. I think anyone that's truly trying to take this topic seriously, that's the approach you have to take, because they're no matter what you believe, there's undeniably a lot of bunk and garbage and nonsense in this topic that you've got to be able to weed through and get through. Otherwise, you're just going to be bogged down with the nonsense and you never get anywhere. There's nothing wrong with being skeptical. What people, and I think people are a little too reflexive with calling people skeptics and debunkers just because they don't believe the same thing as you do about some individual case. I think we also need to be tolerant of other people's views. not get mad because somebody doesn't believe the same thing as you do as about UFOs. Like, there's no reason to make things personal and start attacking people. Like, I really don't care, like, if you're a Lou Elizondo fanatic or if you believe Billy Meyer or Bob Lazar. Like, I don't, like, I'm not going to fight with you about it. Like, because why should I? Like, it doesn't matter. We can be tolerant and skeptical and rational and still be interested in this topic.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think my major sort of criticism of skeptical culture would be that, which is, talking about like culture, like sort of like people tending to approach, like a large number of people tending to approach skepticism from a sort of cultural framework and in similar ways, if that makes sense. I'm trying to describe it as best as I can without, making generalizations. But I mean, this is kind of a general sort of thing, so it's hard to describe that way. But anyway, is basically, I think that there is among some skeptics like a tendency to sort of dismiss or reject anything that sort of is not a part of their experience, but is a part of someone else's experience. You know what I'm saying? So I think that there's there's some skepticism that, and this is again, I think it's a cultural skepticism, and it isn't everyone, and skepticism is much more broad than this. That basically, that I think that some skepticism can lead to bigotry. Like that. For example, Michael Shermer, basically giving his sort of skeptical take on gender, I think it really fails to actually address a trans perspective, and is also offensive to trans people. But, that aside, I think he fails to really actually consider the trans issue as a complex issue that's affecting a marginalized group of people, and he more looks at it as, a group of people who are sort of, due to a contemporary trend, kind of creating this pathology for ourselves, that kind of thing. Is what I'm saying making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of skeptics just really they're coming from it from kind of a scientific, like a scientific methodological kind of point of view, and less interested in some of the more humanities, personal experience kind of side of things, and so that kind of gets dismissed. Which, again, I'm interested in folklore and mythology and legend and oral histories and collecting personal experiences. I don't consider that science or evidence per se, but or that really should be considered scientifically or as evidence. But I think it's valid to collect them. Absolutely. But I do think skeptics do try to limit to what they can actually analyze, and personal experience is kind of more out there. That's something you collect, not analyze.
Kind of tricky. Yeah, I know what you're both saying. Yeah, I mean, in Shermer, I've sort of detected a kind of he's trying to kind of defend the establishment, as it were, and it's sort of a hostility towards more radical takes and things which kind of deviate from the social norm, and
contrarianism, skepticism. Yeah.
On the matter of gender equality and those sorts of trans issues and so on, certainly seen that with him and others. I find that takes to be kind of not very nuanced. Okay, whatever one thinks of like the trans issue, like what the exact truth of it is, or within that, you know, I just find his takes to be sort of a bit not very well thought out.
Mm.
I mean, he tries to kind of give it a veneer of scientific validity, but there's just a lot more to be said, let's say, than he. I mean, whatever one's perspective, like, I just think his take, it doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of it.
And who are you talking about again? I'm sorry.
Michael Shermer.
Okay, yeah, I would. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the more famous or well-known kind of like professional skeptics can be a bit more skeptical strictly for the sake of being skeptical about everything, basically, like even to the point where they're not really doing enough research on it. They're reflectively being skeptical to something they're not all that well informed or nuanced about. And it's actually kind of weird. Like, a lot of the people on Twitter that are some of my more skeptical followers that I see are skeptical about some of the UFO like claims are just like absolutely not skeptical about other stuff that they should be. You know, it's like they can see through some stuff, but when it comes to other things, it's just like no, they're stuck in their beliefs and they don't want to change them.
A really egregious example is Thunderfoot. You know, this skeptic who
he did that
completely eviscerates Elon Musk and all of his vaporware crap, and he really like does excellent analyses looking at like certain scams and things like that. But when it comes to women, like, he's got absolute garbage takes.
Mm-hmm.
And that unfortunately has been a thing within like the skeptic and even kind of atheist community.
Yeah.
You know when like the new atheists were a thing back in the 10 years ago or so, with Richard Dawkins and Dennett and Harris and Christopher Hitchens, there was definitely, I saw, a misogynist component among many of the followers, at least. Not always the main speakers, but like within the community, if you can call it a community, there was definitely a misogynistic element.
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if Sam Harris was totally misogynistic. I can't stand most of that guy's takes. I think he's, like, personally, I just think he's just really pompous and arrogant and pretends like he has the background, you know, for saying the kinds of things that he does, but he doesn't have like an extensive philosophical background or anything like that. I don't Anyway, it's just my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, also, I mean, I think Christopher Hitchens was really brilliant, but he, you know, he really wanted to like find some dirt on the Dalai Lama, you know, and I don't like that he promoted this idea of anti-religionism. I thought that was a very unhealthy direction to try to move skepticism in. I mean, yes, organized religion is deeply problematic, but I think it's much more complicated than just being against religion, you know, for a variety of reasons.
But I'm a big fan of Hitchens' razor, anyways. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So, and that would apply to most UFO claims. You know, like what they're asserting without backing up with evidence. You don't have to provide evidence to disprove their claim. You know, when they didn't provide any evidence to prove it in the first place. So
yeah, yes, I have heard of that, and I should have known what you were talking about, but I just assumed you were talking about a brand of razor. I wanted to share this with everybody. This is a picture of a horseshoe vortex cloud, which I
Did you take that?
Yes, I did.
I was wondering about that. Cool.
I took this on Friday in Portland. This was here, I believe what's going on is, okay, so this is underneath a cloud front here, and the cloud front breaks up here where it sort of turns into these little clouds, and back here is this big hazy cloud called, I believe, a stratus cloud, or it might be a stratocumulus or something like that. Here's another, or possibly the same cloud, but from a different time and location on the same day.
What's that orb in the background?
The UAP.
That is the Orford Ness Lighthouse. That's the sun, actually. That's
Why are you a debunker, Rachel? These are clearly photos of interdimensional portals being opened up in the sky by UAPs.
Oh,
What?
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, that's Pushpaka Vimana. The chariot of
See, yep.
So, but yeah,
That's the space rip. I saw that in Doctor Who. You know, that's the space rip. That's the crack in the wall that the bad wolf's coming through.
it's the Nexus.
Space.
So these are kind of like they're these little vortices that form into a tube, you know, when hot air rises and then it hits a wall of air and then it kind of just spins around and it forms this little vortex. And then what happens is it'll rise in the middle because the hot air inside will continue to rise, and then it forms a sort of, it bows out. Here it kind of makes a frowny, and it was really creepy looking when I saw it because it was definitely the largest horseshoe vortex cloud I've ever seen, and it was under this strange veil of hazy stratus.
It's Cthulhu's tentacle, man. It's his tentacle. Watch out, he's coming for you.
Yeah.
Why you gotta ruin my fun with your science, man? You and your clouds and vapors and vortex trails and particles. It's a UAP, man. It's a UAP.
Yeah. I'm really enjoying Amy's hot takes on reproductive rights and gender identity rights. So that's everything that was. Oh yeah, no. Did you want to talk about egg-shaped craft, Louise? We could talk about that for a little bit if folks want to.
Did I want to talk about that? I think I mentioned it. Oh yeah. Whether there's a propensity towards egg-shaped craft reports in agricultural settings, because
yeah.
like, reflection just of something in the environment, eggs
of agricultural themes. That's an interesting idea. Like, I wonder.
You could probably take Valet's table of landings, in his book Passport to Magonia, and in fact, people have taken the table out of the book and put it online, and you could probably automate a script or something that could look up the various locations listed to see if they're rural or urban areas and look for keywords of like egg and see how many cases to compare. It probably would not be that much, work to take that table and figure that out, but I don't know that anyone's done it.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is sort of like that they end up being egg-shaped because, like, it's just like a very sort of mid-century, like, futuristic design, like it looks like something that could have been designed in the 1950s, this sort of sleek, modern, kind of 50s, 60s style to it. And I feel like, if people have experiences like this, then maybe what's going on is their unconscious mind is trying to construct something that fits into this worldview, like a model of the world that they have in their mind or something like that. And so it just kind of makes something up. Maybe, I'm just speculating, of course, but so like they'll just draw on, like whatever, like sci-fi or, things like that their brain has glommed onto.
And an egg is really almost kind of like a saucer that's kind of like got fatter or like, or blurred out like on the edges, like,
some of these, like some sightings where they describe it as being egg-shaped, it could just be, because it's from a distance and they're just seeing a light. They're just describing a shape of a light, which
the
first thing I was thinking more of like the third encounter. Encounters of the third kind, though. Like
absolutely. That's what I figured you meant. Yeah,
Trinity, etc. Yeah, but there could also be an effect going on with first and second degree encounters, and just like beyond 500 feet, which was Hynek's criteria, I think.
Right, for close encounters, yeah.
Right.
Which is almost kind of wild because like people, I don't think people realize how far 500 feet like really is. Like when I was doing that case, the Crowder case, and kind of mapping out based on how he said it was like so many 100 feet away or whatever, and mapping out on the road with like the tool to see how far distances are, and it's like it's really quite a ways away. Like that's like a football field like away, like the other side of a football field, 500 some feet.
How many meters is it? I always have to convert to meters because I come from the civil.
I don't know how many feet of football field. It shows how little I know about sports.
500 feet is 152.4 meters.
Yeah, it's quite a ways away.
Yeah.
And people, something brought up by Henry as well, now that I'm on the topic, is that people will, this is relevant to close encounter cases, which are supposedly closer than 500 feet. Mm-hmm. But people often are very bad at estimating distance. So they could see something which is beyond 500 feet, but they misconstrue it as being closer, and then that gets lumped into the CE cases.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's the case usually.
In the airship effect, for example, you see like some, Earth-grazing meteor breaking up in the atmosphere or something like that.
Yeah,
it's up a huge area of the sky. So, like, if you could easily misinterpret that as being very close when it's actually tens of thousands of feet away.
Well, yeah. Look at the cases that the basically the only true cases where alleged UFO events interfered with airplanes was cases where, like, for example, it was either Venus or it was a meteorite probably 50 or 100 miles away, but the pilot was sure it was just about to crash into his plane that was right next to him, and takes evasive action and ends up like injuring passengers that way, when really he was evading either Venus, which was 25 million miles away, or he was evading like a bolide that was probably 50 miles away. And so you really can't, people are horrible at distance measurements. They're horrible at speed measurements. Like, this is why a lot of UFO researchers, and I think even Henry may have even recommended this, I know like Jenny Randles did, like, is that investigators should stop asking questions like that, like how far away was it, how big was it, because those are worthless like criteria. Like, they don't know that. You should be asking like how many degrees of arc does it subtend in the sky? Like at what angular elevation was it from, the horizon to you? Stuff that they can actually determine. And then if you have other data, maybe you can try to figure out how big it was. But as far as like distance, I'm convinced a lot of times when people say like they're so sure of what they saw because it was only a couple 100 feet away. Only it probably wasn't a couple 100 feet away in many cases. Like I have been with people that said they were seeing a UFO that they thought was close by. And I'm like, that thing's miles away. That's like a plane. What are you talking about? Like, no, that's like 500 feet away. I'm like, no, it's not. That's an airplane. It's like miles away. Like, so people are just really bad at that. So you got to take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt when people talk about distances to the craft. So,
yep.
But I also measured.
Well, returning to this close encounters of the second and third kinds, really CE3s mostly probably. Can you think of a lot of egg-shaped craft cases? Were there a lot of the egg-shaped ones in the Valensolf lab, Jeff?
There was a few anyways that I saw in there.
Yeah.
And like I say, even going back to the earlier cases in the 50s, like in Italy and France, like a lot of them were kind of egg-shaped craft that the people were seeing. There was that case I mentioned where they said it was like rugby ball shaped, which again, like kind of egg-shaped craft. So, I mean, there's quite a few of them. If you just search for egg in like just Valet's book there, you'll come up with quite a few cases that pop up in the index. So
but I mean, CE3s also kind of fell off. There just aren't as many CE3s now, or if any. I don't know.
Yeah.
it seems like they're just not reported, but they were reported a lot during the 60s and 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Like 73, like the heyday of the CE3, and then into like the 70s were like the main cases. Yeah.
And then it became a lot about the hypnotic regression, so like delayed CE3s in a way.
Yeah, there's quite a few, and there's just some cases I was working on this last week that I ended up skipping over because it turned out the case, like, he didn't remember it happening when he came up with the case like 30 years later after hypnosis regression. And like for me, it's like, nah, like something you didn't even know about until you came up with hypnotic regression decades later. Like, I'm not sure there's a whole lot you can do with that story that you're being told. You know,
and my eyes always glaze over when somebody tells me a story that they remember from when they were 11 or 8. It's like, oh, no, that's basically worthless now. I don't want to even, okay, have a nice day sort of thing.
Well, then the problem is people.
My eyes don't glaze over, but I do, you know, I definitely take stories like that with a grain of salt. A lot of the people that I interviewed, well, I mean, I didn't interview that many people, but 2 of the people that I interviewed, Campbell and this other guy, they both reported experiences from when they were like 12 or 13. And if someone has an experience that they find personally impactful from that time period, I feel like it's pretty, even if it's unlikely that it actually resulted from any kind of actual event of interest, you know, and it was more really just an internal experience that they constructed, it's important to them. So I feel like it's really important to treat that with a certain degree of respect.
Yeah, the problem is, like, a lot of people is once they've kind of become convinced that they have these kind of experiences, like they believe they saw a UFO or had an abduction experience, they then go back and mine their memory for every vague experience they barely remember, everything that they thought might have been weird at some point in their life, and reinterpret those kind of under this lens that it was like a paranormal or like a UFO experience. And when in most cases it's probably just like a foggy childhood memory that you just don't remember that well. There was no UFO. And you get the same thing when there's UFO flaps, right? Like, that's how you get what's called like the report release effect, is that sometimes when a major UFO event happens, then you get all these other people that are reporting sightings that they had, but it was before that initial event that kicked off the flap. So, for example, with like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, people say that when that movie came out, it didn't necessarily create a wave in new sightings, but it did create a flap in people reporting older sightings that they supposedly had before the movie came out. And because you get people like, so somebody says they saw a UFO, you're watching the news like the next day and you see somebody saw a UFO, all of a sudden you think, well, I did see a light last night. I didn't know what it was. Maybe it was a UFO. But at the time, you didn't think anything of it. It was just a plane, or it wasn't anything unusual. It's only after you've been told that people are seeing UFOs that you start to go back and reprocess your memory and think, well, maybe that was the UFO I saw. Maybe that was an abduction experience I had when I had that missing time when I was younger. You know, and people have a tendency to do that. And you see that on UFO Twitter all the time. You see people that once they come to this topic, then start to go back and come up with all these memories from childhood of all these strange encounters that they might have had, and they start to believe they've been abductees, or
and that they've been set on a mission.
Yeah, they've been set on a mission, or they were part of secret government programs as a child that they were put into because they were abductees, or I mean, some people get pretty far out with it, but
yeah, and hypnotherapists and like abduction advocates, they really encourage that.
Exactly. They love that stuff.
Thinking, yeah. I remember, reading, I don't remember where it was, but I really want to find it. It was like, because I read it when I was a kid, and it was like some list of like signs that you might be a star child or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, that you have an affinity for willow trees, or you have like hazel eyes and stuff. Like it's probably kind of racist too. Like
I've always had an affinity for ice cream, so I guess I'm part gray.
Is it strawberry ice cream though? Because that's
yeah.
Okay,
you're part even.
Yes. So.
But Rachel, when I said that my eyes glaze over, I was kind of alluding to the cases like the one that we covered previously about that Vicente Juan Ballester almost covered in Spain, where the guy was like 25 years ago, he, had some encounter with something over a lake, but then he can't remember certain things about it, or it changes his story. And Vicente Juan's recommendation to him was just like, get on with your life. This was probably just some mundane thing, like a balloon. It's not really important anymore. It's just like, you should have a normal family life, normal, work life, and just don't try to make so much out of this. I think that's a healthy response in those sorts of cases.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the context, and I was saying that more in terms of like when we're interpreting a case, for example, like, if I'm just trying to figure out at home, was this real or not? I'm probably going to come to the conclusion like, oh yeah, this didn't, this is probably a balloon or something, but I think just in terms of, like how you interact with the witness, or something like that. And that, obviously Ballester almost has tons of experience with that. And I have very little, almost no experience. But just like, I feel like in terms of, I've also collected other kinds of anecdotes, like, collecting folklore for classes and stuff like that in the past. And I feel like, when you're talking to someone about something, an experience that they had, it's a really different case from when you're trying to look at it analytically to understand what happened after you leave.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important as an investigator that, like, you want to have that sympathetic ear that, Eddie Ballard talks about, but I think you also want to maintain a bit of distance to, like a lot of times the person might want you to try and explain it or to give them answers. Like, I don't think you should do that. Like, I think you should be collecting the report, like, kind of unbiased, like, and not feeding them answers and introducing your ideas and theories, and like that should be done elsewhere, like without the witness, I don't think is really your job, particularly at that point when you're first interviewing and collecting the information from them, to be inserting your theories and your ideas and to be sharing what you believe about UFOs. Like I don't think, for example, you should even be telling the person what your personal beliefs on UFOs are. Like, I don't believe you should be influencing like that, investigation. You should just be listening to what they say, asking them critical but respectful questions, but not coming to any judgments at that point in time or sharing your ideas or theories with it. And that's how so much stuff gets biased in UFO investigations, is once the UFO investigators come in, they start to introduce all their own beliefs and ideas into the story and the narrative, and it kind of like almost infects that person's original story. And from that point on, it's hard to tell what was introduced by the UFO investigator and what was actually part of the original story being told.
But, yeah, it has to be very strong quarantine procedures.
Yeah.
I guess like the motto that we should adopt is limit contamination, because everybody's contaminated now, because like it's out there in the culture, so everybody's got ideas already in their minds, but we have to try to limit that.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, and
we meet.
What? That's a UFO that sounds like a bird and it moves like a bird, but I'm still going to call it in.
It's a fake bird.
Everybody knows birds aren't real, man. Yeah.
That's one of the Aquiline drones from the CIA.
And for our final story tonight, a swallowtail sought refuge in the eye of a hurricane. In the eye of Hurricane Debbie, on Monday night, a swallow-tailed kite was tracked, possibly entering the eye of Hurricane Debbie, which was emerging at that time. The bird, called Suwannee 22, began migrating south from northern Florida on July 31st to rest in Picayune Strand State Forest. From there, they headed west over the Gulf of Mexico to migrate to the Yucatan Peninsula on August 2nd as the storm's winds first started forming and moving northward. Suwannee-22 flew back north over the following days, rebounding from the brewing storm several times. On Monday, they probably entered the eye of Hurricane Debbie as it was developing, according to Gina Kent, senior conservation scientist with the Avian Research and Conservation Institute. USA Today reported. Shortly after Suwannee-22 arrived at the Big Bend Wildlife Management Area on Tuesday morning, some distance north of where they departed on their migration. Sorry, technical difficulties. Technical difficulties. We're experiencing technical difficulties. If I say that long enough, maybe it'll do something. Okay. All right. Before we go, if you enjoy this show, we would like you to please consider subscribing to our channel, Ufo Sunset. Please also hit the like button and hit the notification bell icon if you'd like to get notified about upcoming videos. And come and join our cozy and intimate live chat. A great plus for joining the live chat is that you can give us constructive feedback live on the air, especially if we make any factual errors. You can also join our Discord, a temporary link to which can be found in the episode description. Here at Ufos, our political and personal views are not the same, and the work of each of us is independent work. Personal views or positions expressed in individual pieces are not those of Ufos, who is not a person and has no views, or the other hosts. Please be sure to check out our respective content. I can be found at the Earth YouTube channel. Visit Luis Cayetano's website, ufologyiscorrupt.com, or we will shoot you in an alleyway. And you can find Jeff Knox's daily posts on history and the science of UFOs on the Hellscape or Facebook. Jeff Knox spends all of his time studying UFOs, and he doesn't make almost any money off of it. Please consider visiting his Patreon and becoming his patron. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Afa. Any parting words?
Afa, have you been talking to Francis Swan again?
No, just Afa.
Okay.
All right. And in the words of the disc, people who live in stones pretty much have... Oh, I'm sorry. People who live in stones pretty much have free reign over glass houses.
George Van Tassel lived in a stone.